So it's finally time to take what you've learned and apply it to designing your own figures. Now that doesn't mean that you're cast off into the wind to have to draw your own figure and uh, start from scratch. You can use inspirational images, but again, we want to be honorable to fellow artists and not take something that is not in the public domain and call it our own. We can, however, use it for inspiration. This is an image of a Disney character, and I used it as a jumping off point, as inspiration in a character that I created in Shadow. Before I get into the changes that I made and how I went about jointing it and doing trials for joints, I want to talk a little bit about some basics of creating your own jointed figures. Something that may not have become apparent in working with the resources of the world traditions is making joints that don't leave a gap. So here's a figure that is a coloring book page that, say, you would want to use with a class full of young students. Typically what happens is that people new to the idea of shadow puppetry want to cut off the moving parts. They want to separate them where they join the body. And instead of doing that, we need to teach them to elongate the joints so that there's an overlap and a place for the joint to reside within that overlap. Now, typically, what you want to do is to have a circle in that place so that you don't end up with a gap around the joint. Now, this is a coloring book figure, this chubby little beaver, so his body mass pretty much covers up the whole area of the joint. But I'll show you in a second what I'm talking about with a gap. So when you're working with young people or people new to shadows, you want to be sure to explain this concept that there needs to be an overlap and that the joints need to be cut out separately, not cut from the whole. And here they would be in separate pieces, which of course you have gained awareness of in your replications. In this figure, you can see what happens when the joint, so take a look here at this little arm, when one circle is larger than the space beneath it. So you see that little hump that he gets when he moves his head forward. Now, I kind of like that because it showed his shoulder. But in some cases, that's going to be unsightly. Say, for example, if it was at someone's waist. So if the circles are the same size, you won't have that happen. So say, for example, you wanted to make an arm and you didn't want it to have the segmented look of like a Carago's arm. If you draw a lower arm and an upper arm segment, and one is significantly larger than the other, where they meet, then you're going to get a break. So if you were to overlap that small one, it would look like this. And that break happens there at the top, you can see, where they don't line up. So if you make these circles match, that won't happen. And if you took a look, say, at tortoise and crane from the Chinese tradition, that beautiful fluid neck on the crane, that's done by making those overlapping circles exactly the same size. So here's my inspirational image, and it's a very strong character. Disney churns them out very readily. And I think that he's very strong because he's simplified. The belly has already been chosen as the strongest element. I'm going to push that a little bit further. And I'll do that by increasing the size of the belly in comparison to the head and the arms and the legs. Now, in order to make it best suited for shadows, his face should be in profile. not 3/4 as it's shown here, especially since I'm going to be putting him, using him as a black silhouette, not a translucent puppet. Lotte Reininger pointed that out, that a human figure, is strongest with its body in 3/4 and its face in profile, and that's what I'll be doing with him. His body is pretty much in that configuration, but we'll take it a little further. Here I'm going to show you one method for doing jointing trials. So we know that this is going to be a 3-part, 2-joint / 2-rod puppet. And there are lots of different ways that you can go about doing that. And so in order for me to try out the movement that I wanted to get, I had an idea of what I wanted it to do from my storyboards, right? But I needed a physical example of it so that I could try it out. Now in this one, you can see I've put an arm and a leg together, and then another arm and leg on the body, and the head separate. So those are the 3 pieces in this example. And I've got a push pin in the back side underneath the head so that that can move smoothly on my corkboard, and then the other thumb push pin on the front. I guess it's a thumbtack on the back where it's flat like this, so that it can move easily on my corkboard. So I found that the movement wasn't quite what I wanted in this figure. In order to get his legs to cross, his arms had to move too far. I did end up making changes to the belly as well, but these simple shapes sufficed for doing the tests. Yeah, you can see that the arm and leg are together, the head is separate, and then the other arm and leg are on the belly in this one. In this next trial, I tried to rectify the problem of the arm being too far by just changing the position of the arm relative to that leg. And that really wasn't satisfying either. Still having the head in its own place, I realized I really wasn't getting a lot out of that. So in my next sample, I put the arms with the head and a separate leg on its own, and then the other leg attached to the body. And that ultimately gave me the movement I wanted. The figure was able to walk and dance and kind of flick his legs together in the air, which was what I was looking for. Another way to go about doing joint trials, as well as altering your figure, is to just use tracing paper. Typically, this is how I do it. I find that it's a lot easier than cutting out all those pieces, and to me it's just a more organic way of working. So here you can see that the figure, some of the shapes have changed. I've got the head with the arms, and I've got the leg, and I'm working out positioning as well as dimensions. And all of that can be done very easily with the tracing paper. I can move it around. I can retrace on top of that if I want to change something. Here you can see I've decided to try a jaw joint, and it's really all very simple using the tracing paper. I can just substitute parts. It's like, you know, Legos for shadow artists. So here you can see that I discovered that if I added a headpiece to the body and added the jaw to the arms, that I could have control over his mouth and his arms at the same time. And that was a fun discovery, and I believe that is what I ultimately went with. And you can see here that obviously I would need to move the joint to a place logical for the jaw movement, something that would also work for the arms. Then once you have each of your pieces ready and designed, you can use the Sarrel paper, or you can just add some lead or carbon on the back side of your tracing paper, since you can see your lines very easily. Just darken it all in and then flip it over, and you're ready to trace onto your cardstock or whatever you'll be using to make your puppet. You just go right over those lines. The fact that the tracing paper is clear makes it very easy. It's kind of like your own carbon paper. Here you can see that I've made some refinements to the figure. I added the head to the body, with the exception of the jaw, which was added to the arms. Changed the body shape. There was more of that to come, to square up the shoulders and just make some room for the jaw. I didn't love the single moving leg, but I was happy with the silhouette of the other leg. So I just took another piece of tracing paper, traced the leg I liked, flipped it over, and then was able to create the moving leg to match. Easy peasy. Next step is to find the best point for your control rods. You can see here I'm doing trials with just tape and skewers. There's also a bendy straw there. This demonstration was for another assignment that I've since deleted from the course, but bendy straws were used as an example of a material for classroom use. They're not terribly good at controlling fine movements. They're wobbly, they're not very strong. But they're handy in a classroom situation for at least now, while they're available. The environmental factors coming into play these days, and they may not be so readily available. Skewers are, however, again, not the best means of control because the attachment, you can't really drill them. Tape is really all you're going to get. But it's a good solution just for trial's sake, to find that sweet spot where you have enough control, where it's not in the way, where it's not going to bump into something else or another control rod. Generally, you want to be close to the joint. Bradshaw talks about this a lot. For your Australia influence assignment, you'll want to do the rods the way he does, with the little modified U shape at the end. But you can see I had enough control here that I could tell that that was the spot that I needed to be in. I also could tell that I was going to need some stops. You can see how the mouth is closing a little too far, as if he doesn't have teeth. And you'll learn these things as you start to manipulate it. And in the next spot, I will show you about stops. Here you can see the modifications that I've made to the rods. I reinforced my straws because they were very flimsy by just putting in a bamboo skewer and securing it with tape. And I also moved the upper rod, the one that's controlling the arms and the jaw, to a little bit further away from the joint so that I have a little bit more leverage. I've also added some stops because the jaw was wanting to move in both directions too far, both closing too far and opening too far. I located the two positions of the extremes that I wanted, both closed and open, and I placed a little bit of cardboard there as a stop. Unfortunately, with the rigorous movements that I want this puppet to do, the mouth and jaw would kind of pull away and ride right over those stops. So in the next segment, you'll see how I solved that with the string restriction.
I went ahead and chose to pick point here and a stop point here because it's about halfway between the range of motion that I want this to have. Now here it is in the closed position. And then if I gather that up and take it all the way to as far as it will go in the other position, see that that's a good amount of string. So I'll go ahead and tie a knot there. Let's try again. It's that. So I'm going to put it to one of my extremes and then tie a knot. Before I tighten it, I'm going to check. So it goes all the way open and all the way closed, the places that I want. And I just did 2 points here so that I could easily change it. You could just do one, tie it on the other side, but then you have to knot it in just the right spot. I'm checking that my string isn't going to show. That was another factor that went into planning where that point would be. And there we go. And that will effectively keep him from dislocating his jaw. Well, that about wraps up this video. I'll look forward to seeing your storyboards and your presentations on VoiceThread. Thanks.